On the quiet, vast canvas of southwestern Minnesota, there exists a profound silence that has endured for over a decade and a half. This silence belongs to Brandon Swanson, a young man who, on a warm spring night in 2008, simply vanished between two small towns, leaving behind only the ghost of a desperate phone call and a haunting two-word exclamation. His story is not just one of a missing person, but a powerful, bewildering narrative that ripped apart the notion of safety in rural America and led to the creation of a lasting legal legacy. The story begins, as many do, with a moment of celebration. Brandon Swanson, born on January 30th, 1989, was a native of Marshall, a peaceful, close-knit community in Lyon County, Minnesota. He was a recent graduate of Marshall High School and, in the spring of 2008, was concluding his first year of study in wind turbine technology at the Minnesota West Community and Technical College campus in Canby. The night of May 13th, 2008, marked the end of the academic semester, a time for well-earned relaxation and gathering with friends to mark the transition to summer. It was a routine college night, the sort of evening that fades into pleasant memory for thousands of students across the country. But for Brandon, it was the final chapter of his documented life. Brandon was 19 years old and, by all accounts, was enjoying the simple, celebratory atmosphere. He attended at least 2 gatherings that evening in Canby. Friends who were with him recalled that he had consumed alcohol, as is common for many college-age individuals in a celebratory environment. Crucially, however, his companions later noted that his consumption was not excessive. He did not appear to be visibly intoxicated or severely impaired as the night progressed, an important detail that complicates any simple theory of impairment, being the sole cause of the tragic misjudgments that followed. The hours passed, as they often do with young people. Laughter, conversation, and a sense of easy relief as the semester ended. As the evening wound down, Brandon made the decision to head home to Marshall. The drive was a familiar one, a journey of approximately 30 miles that on the main roads typically took less than an hour. It was sometime before midnight when he left Canby, beginning his journey under the vast, star-dotted sky of the Minnesota prairie. The roads he chose, however, were not the main, faster highways, but rather a network of rural, less traveled back roads. This choice, which at the time may have seemed inconsequential, has since become one of the smaller, perplexing questions of the case. Why did he opt for the more confusing dark farm roads instead of the straight route? Some have speculated, with the passage of time, that he may have done so to avoid the possibility of encountering law enforcement if he felt he might be over the legal limit, a common precaution for young drivers. Yet, this remains an educated guess, a tiny, unanswered deviation that put him precisely in the path of the unknown. The flat landscape, broken only by tree lines and distant farm lights, offered little orientation in the deep night. The clock crept toward 2 a.m. on May 14th, 2008, and the silence of the rural roads was soon broken by the sound of Brandon's Chevrolet Lumina sedan veering off course. Just before 2:08 a.m., Brandon reached for his cell phone and made a call to his parents, Annette and Brian Swanson, back in Marshall. The reason for the call was simple but unsettling. He had driven his car into a ditch. The vehicle was resting in a difficult position, and he couldn't get it out. The immediate facts Brandon relayed were reassuring. He was uninjured. The car was not severely damaged, but the wheels had lost traction, leaving the vehicle high-centered on what was later determined to be an access path or access road to a field. He was stuck and needed a ride home. His parents, naturally, immediately agreed to drive out to help him, the immediate reflex of any parent to a child in trouble. They assumed, and Brandon confirmed this belief, that he was somewhere near Lind, a small town located approximately 7 miles southwest of Marshall, a familiar point of reference for all of them. This initial, incorrect assessment of his location proved to be the single most devastating error of the entire night. The rural roads of southwestern Minnesota, as one search team member later observed, are designed on a logical grid-like system based on section lines. But in the dark, they can quickly become disorienting, a confusing web of gravel and dirt. Brandon, who suffered from a serious depth perception issue due to partial blindness in his left eye and required glasses, had already made a poor decision by leaving his glasses inside the car before embarking on his walk. This was a critical factor, as it severely compromised his ability to accurately read the landscape and navigate the absolute darkness of the farmland. Brian and Annette Swanson immediately got into their car and began driving toward the area near Lind. To aid the search, they stayed in constant contact with Brandon via his cell phone, which was with the provider Singular Wireless, now AT&T. The plan was straightforward. They would drive slowly, constantly on the lookout for a car in a ditch, and occasionally flash their headlights. Brandon, in turn, would flash the lights of his Lumina to signal his exact position. They drove slowly and deliberately, their eyes straining against the darkness, the phone call acting as their lifeline. But as they drove through the Lind area, flashing their lights into the darkness, they saw nothing. Brandon, still on the line, reported the same. He did not see their lights. The disconnection between their location and his own was stark and baffling. Brandon, a young man who presumably knew the area, continued to insist he was near Lind, despite the objective reality that his parents were nowhere near him. The minutes dragged on, turning the simple recovery operation into a tense, frustrating game of invisible hide-and-seek. As the minutes wore on and the fruitless search continued, a growing frustration set in, fueled by the cold night and the inability to connect. Brandon's initial confidence in his location began to wane, and he grew tired of waiting in the darkness. The car was stationary, but the night was not. It was approximately 2:17 a.m. when Brandon decided to abandon his vehicle. He told his father, Brian, that he would leave the car and start walking toward the lights he could see on the horizon. He estimated that the town of Lind was only a short distance away, perhaps a couple of miles, and that he would walk there directly. He instructed his father to drive to the parking lot of a local bar in Lind and wait for him. The new plan seemed to offer a solution, a way to end the frustrating search. Brandon Swanson, maintaining his calm, agreed to the new plan and continued the conversation with his son as he drove. This decision, to remain on the phone for the duration of Brandon's walk, was an act of parental presence that, while tragic in its ending, preserved every word and sound of Brandon's final moments. It turned the final 47 minutes of his life into an involuntary and detailed testimony. For the next 47 minutes, the phone call continued, turning into an almost journalistic narration of a desperate walk in the dark. Brandon described his surroundings as he navigated the rural landscape. He noted that he was walking on a gravel road, and later mentioned having to cut across a farm field to save time. He described climbing over an old fence and passing by the foundation of an abandoned farmhouse. He even complained to his father about having to cross a second fence line shortly before the call ended. He was describing real landmarks, real terrain, but placing them in the entirely wrong geographical context. Unbeknownst to both Brandon and his parents, the entire search was being conducted in the wrong county, in the wrong environment, 25 miles away from the true location. This profound geographical misconception was a fatal flaw. Brandon was not near Lind. He was, in fact, nowhere near it. His cell phone, as police would later confirm by obtaining the records, had been pinging off a tower near Mineta along State Highway 68, the main road leading back to Canby. The car itself was later found in a ditch off a gravel road along the Lincoln County line, 1 mile north of Highway 68, near the town of Taunton, roughly halfway between Marshall and Canby. The entire initial search, therefore, had been based on a profound geographical misconception, costing crucial hours when a direct response might have saved his life. The lights Brandon thought he was walking toward, believing they belonged to Lind, were likely the illumination atop a distant crane elevator near Minnesota. In the flat, open expanse of the Minnesota farmland, such a light source can easily appear to be closer than it is. And in the dark, without his glasses, Brandon's already impaired depth perception may have compounded the misjudgment. Moreover, the direction Brandon chose to walk was not toward Lind, but toward a town several miles further away, in a more remote area. The initial, critical 20 minutes of the investigation were consumed by this misdirection, a cruel trick of the night, and a faulty assumption about his location. This fundamental error, the 25-mile gap between the estimated location and the true location, is the foundation of the mystery, setting the stage for the eerie events that culminated in the final, chilling moment of contact, the phone call between Brandon Swanson and his son Brandon. Continued for 47 agonizing minutes, a conversation conducted against the backdrop of an invisible, bewildering landscape. This continuous contact, while failing to pinpoint Brandon's exact location, provided a narrative thread that would become the most vital piece of evidence, yet also the most frustrating element of the entire case. It documented his movements right up to the very moment he disappeared, offering a chilling audio record of his final journey. As Brian drove the dark roads near Lind, and Brandon walked the dark roads near Taunton, the conversation was a mixture of practical direction-giving and mounting anxiety. Brian, relying on his son's perceived location, struggled to guide Brandon toward an identifiable landmark, while Brandon described his immediate surroundings in an attempt to provide better coordinates. Brandon's descriptions painted a picture of classic, rural Minnesota terrain. He mentioned the gravel road, the feeling of the earth beneath his feet, and the visual absence of traffic or other signs of life. The fact that the call maintained a strong, consistent connection is itself noteworthy, suggesting that Brandon's phone was actively being held and used, contradicting any simple theory of an accidental drop in the dirt or grass earlier in the walk. The turning point in Brandon's walk and in the conversation was his decision to leave the established road network for a shortcut. He told his father he was going to cut across a farm field. This move took him off a predictable route into more treacherous and uneven terrain. This area, later confirmed by search dogs, led him through the overgrown remnants of an old farmstead, including an abandoned driveway and an old foundation. The nature of the conversation remained focused on navigation and reassurance. Brandon did not sound intoxicated, disoriented, or confused in a way that suggested an immediate mental breakdown. He was frustrated, perhaps, but coherent, focused on the goal of reaching the lights he could see and meeting his father. As the minutes ticked past 2:30 a.m., Brandon's narrative became more descriptive of his immediate environment. He spoke of encountering 2 fence lines. He complained to his father about the presence of the second fence, an unexpected obstacle in his path. Crucially, in the final moments of the conversation, Brandon mentioned hearing or seeing water nearby. This detail aligns perfectly with the geography of his true location. The search dogs would later track his scent to the very edge of the Yellow Medicine River, a major waterway in the area. The Yellow Medicine River, especially in mid-May following the spring thaw, can be swollen and fast-flowing with deep, frigid pockets, a sudden and deadly hazard in the dark. Brandon Swanson, too, later recalled that he thought he could hear the sound of running water on his end of the phone, an ambient noise that suggested Brandon was extremely close to the bank. The presence of the river, combined with Brandon's previous discussion of jumping fences and traversing uneven terrain in the pitch dark, provides the most compelling, natural explanation for the final, sudden end to the call. A young man, slightly impaired, without his glasses, navigating a dangerous riverbank at night, is a recipe for a tragic accident. The call lasted 47 minutes. Then, abruptly, just after 2:30 a.m., the narrative ceased. In the middle of the sentence or thought, Brandon let out a sudden, sharp exclamation. "Oh, shh!" The sound was immediate, visceral, and alarming. Brandon's father, Brian, later stated that the sound he heard suggested a sudden physical action. It sounded like Brandon had slipped and fell, leading Brian to believe his son had lost his footing. There was no sound of a struggle, no shout of terror, no indication of a conversation with another person or an animal attack. It was simply a sudden, surprised, exclamatory reaction to an instantaneous physical event, a sudden, unexpected drop. Following the exclamation, the connection did not immediately sever. This is a common misconception in the retelling of the case. The phone line remained open, but silence descended on Brandon's end. Brian and Annette, their hearts pounding, called out Brandon's name repeatedly into the receiver, hoping for a response. They listened intently, but heard only the background static or the sound of the nearby water and a terrifying silence where their son's voice had just been. After a period of calling out with no reply, the parents eventually hung up the phone. They immediately tried to call back, a frantic attempt to re-establish contact. The subsequent calls rang for a time, sometimes going straight to voicemail, but they never heard Brandon's voice or an answer again. The fact that the phone rang suggests the device was still powered on, somewhere in the dark, but either lost, damaged, or unreachable. The sound of the final exclamation, a sudden slip followed by silence, combined with the prior mention of water, gives heavy weight to the most common theory. Brandon fell into the Yellow Medicine River. If a person falls unexpectedly into a cold, fast-moving river at night, several things could explain the abrupt end to the call and the ensuing silence. First, the simple physics of the fall. A sudden slip, an exclamation of surprise, and the phone is dropped. The phone may have landed in the water, shorted out, or landed on the bank just out of reach. Second, the physiological shock. A sudden cold water immersion especially unexpected, can cause an involuntary gasp reflex, knocking the wind out of a person and briefly incapacitating them. This would prevent him from calling out or continuing the conversation. Third, the effect of the environment. The current, the cold, and the darkness would turn a non-fatal fall into a life-threatening struggle, preventing him from immediately finding the phone or responding to his parents. Regardless of the precise mechanism, the 47-minute conversation, which began as a call for a ride, ended with an ominous, unsolved final moment that transformed a mundane car incident into a true crime mystery. The parents searched the Lind area for several more hours, flashing their lights into the darkness, but with a growing dread, they realized the situation was no longer a simple car retrieval. The sun rose on May 14, 2008, bringing with it the harsh light of reality. Brandon Swanson was gone. The confusion of the previous night, the miscommunication, the mistaken location, and the chilling silence had solidified into a genuine crisis. Just after sunrise, the exhausted and terrified Swansons contacted the local authorities in Marshall to report their 19-year-old son missing. The response they received, however, was shockingly underwhelming, a bureaucratic indifference that would later fuel a major legislative change. The police advised the Swansons to wait, since Brandon was an adult, 19 years old, and had last been seen leaving a party. Law enforcement, at the time, was not immediately required to take a formal missing persons report or begin an investigation. One officer reportedly told Annette Swanson that Brandon had a right to be missing. This prevailing attitude, that an adult who failed to come home was likely out with friends or on a walk, was based on outdated protocols that focused primarily on missing children. The parents, knowing the unusual and alarming circumstances of the final phone call, were stunned by the lack of urgency, a response that cost them crucial time. This initial resistance and delay in launching an official, coordinated search became a source of immense grief and frustration for the family. It meant that the first critical hours of daylight, the hours when a search is most effective and when any trail would be freshest, were lost to bureaucratic inaction and geographical misdirection. Fortunately, the Swansons persisted, and the situation's oddity soon overcame the bureaucratic inertia. To better focus the search, investigators from the Lyon County Sheriff's Office agreed to obtain Brandon's cell phone records from Singular Wireless, Trade T&T. This move proved to be the single most important action in establishing a fact-based search area. The process of obtaining this data in 2008 was slow and arduous, creating a significant and tragic delay. However, when the data was finally processed, the results were definitive and shocking. Brandon's calls had been routed through a cell phone tower located near the intersection of County Routes 3 and 10, close to the town of Minneota. This data placed Brandon in the general vicinity of Taunton and Porter, along State Highway 68, a shocking 25 miles away from the Lind location he had so confidently cited to his parents. The immediate implications were profound. The entire initial search area was wrong. The hours spent by the parents and initial volunteers searching near Lind were utterly wasted. Brandon's disorientation was severe, whether due to the dark, the alcohol, his vision impairment, or a combination of all three. His internal compass was completely compromised. The new area was complex. In an area where three counties, Lyon, Lincoln, and Yellow Medicine, converged creating immediate jurisdictional questions that further complicated the investigation. The focus of the search immediately shifted from Lind to the new 25-mile distant area near Taunton, Minnesota, and Porter, with the cell phone data providing a precise 5-mile radius from the Minnesota Tower. Official search teams, now joined by the Lincoln County Sheriff's Department and led by Sheriff Jack Visecki, descended upon the correct area. It was on the afternoon of May 14th, the same day Brandon was reported missing, that his abandoned car was finally found. Brandon's green Chevrolet Lumina sedan was discovered stuck in a ditch off a gravel road known as Lyon-Lincoln Road, near the border between the two counties. The car was not severely damaged. It was simply high-centered, resting on its undercarriage and unable to gain traction. The scene provided several crucial yet contradictory clues. There were no signs of a struggle around the car, suggesting Brandon left the vehicle willingly and under non-violent circumstances. The key was still in the ignition, and the car was otherwise undamaged. Most importantly, Brandon's prescription glasses, vital for his limited vision, were found inside the car. Why a legally blind young man would intentionally leave his glasses behind before attempting a long walk in the dark remains a profound question, suggesting a deep level of disorientation, or perhaps the belief that his walk would be extremely short. The discovery of the car confirmed two things absolutely: Brandon's true location and the initial premise of the entire event. He got stuck, and he walked away for help. However, the presence of his glasses and the absence of any other clues immediately deepened the mystery of his disappearance. He had walked away from the only fixed point in the night, walking away from the closest town, Taunton, toward a more desolate and dangerous area, the area where the car was found and where Brandon was last heard from. Is a complex network of rural features. It is characterized by flat, featureless farmland, broken up by drainage ditches, gravel roads, and the meandering course of the Yellow Medicine River. This river and its tributaries, such as Mud Creek, are the most prominent geological features and the immediate focus of the search. It was a remote, unlit environment, completely distinct from the slightly more developed Lind area. The only lights Brandon could have seen were the distant, misleading industrial lights of a grain elevator or perhaps an isolated farm. The revelation of the true location ended one mystery where he started, but immediately elevated the next. What happened in the surrounding 3 miles that the search dogs would eventually track? The clock was ticking, and the urgency was only now, hours later, being fully recognized by the official channels. With Brandon Swanson's car located near the Lincoln-Lyon County line, the investigation officially kicked into high gear. The focus shifted entirely from the misplaced search near Lind to the dense rural area around Taunton and the Yellow Medicine River. The multi-agency effort involved the Lincoln County Sheriff's Department and the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, BCA. The state's lead law enforcement agency, Sheriff Jack Visecki of Lincoln County, became the lead investigator, bringing the full force of regional law enforcement to bear on the rural farmland. The immediate goal was simple: find Brandon's path. Search teams, consisting of law enforcement personnel, dedicated search and rescue units, and hundreds of volunteers from the community, were deployed. The entire area, a vast expanse of open fields and winding river valleys, was systematically divided into search grids. Perhaps The most compelling and agonizing piece of evidence in the entire case came from the use of specialized search dogs, or bloodhounds. The canine units were brought to the location of Brandon's abandoned Chevrolet Lumina, where they successfully picked up Brandon's scent. The resulting trail was meticulous and largely confirmed Brandon's narrative from the final phone call. The dogs tracked Brandon's scent away from the car, following the initial gravel road for a significant distance. The trail confirmed his decision to leave the road network and cut across the fields, leading investigators to an abandoned farmstead, past the old foundation, and through the field fences Brandon had described to his father. The dogs tracked the scent for a remarkable 3 miles, approximately 3.2 kilometers from the car, confirming that Brandon covered a considerable distance during the 47-minute phone call. This distance, in the dark and without glasses, is a testament to the young man's determination, or perhaps a sign of his growing desperation. The 3-mile trail ended abruptly at the bank of the Yellow Medicine River. The river, a crucial landmark Brandon had mentioned shortly before the call ended, was running high and fast in mid-May due to the spring melt. At the water's edge, the dog's scent trail, which had been so clear and unwavering across the fields, vanished. This finding immediately lent enormous credence to the drowning theory. It suggested that Brandon had indeed slipped, as his father had suspected, and fallen into the frigid, fast-moving current. However, the narrative of the dog search did not end there, and this critical distinction is why the mystery endures. While one canine unit lost the scent at the water, another dog, following a slightly different path or having a different focus, appeared to pick up Brandon's scent again. This second trail continued up and across the opposite side of the riverbank, proceeding along the bank to another gravel road, where it continued north toward the Yellow Medicine County line, before finally terminating. For Annette Swanson, Brandon's mother, this detail was essential. As she later stated to CNN, the fact that the scent continued across the river and along the riverbank for a distance suggested that Brandon had survived the fall, managed to pull himself out of the water, and continued his frantic walk before disappearing somewhere else. She insisted that, because of this, there really is nothing to indicate that he's in the river. This single, nuanced detail, the continuation of the scent on the far bank, became the foundation for a lingering hope that he did not drown immediately and may have succumbed elsewhere. Despite the complexity of the canine trail, search efforts heavily focused on the Yellow Medicine River itself. Authorities deployed specialized dive teams, sonar equipment, and boats to scour the riverbed and banks. The current was strong, and in parts, the water was up to 10 feet deep, presenting a significant challenge to divers and searchers. The water was cold, and visibility was low, making the search for a small body extremely difficult. Ground sweeps involved hundreds of volunteers in line searches, walking shoulder to shoulder through the fields, drainage ditches, and dense patches of brush. The searches were exhaustive, covering the initial 3-mile radius from the car and expanding outward. Helicopters and aircraft were also used to conduct low-altitude flyovers, attempting to spot any sign of the missing young man from the air, especially in areas inaccessible to foot traffic. The initial burst of search efforts lasted for weeks. Sheriff Fizeki, in a display of personal commitment that speaks volumes about the impact of the case, continued to walk the 2 miles of the Yellow Medicine River, near the termination point of the trail, every day for 30 days straight. However, despite the extensive mobilization of resources, the hundreds of volunteer hours, and the use of cutting-edge, for 2008, forensic tools, not a single piece of physical evidence belonging to Brandon Swanson was ever recovered from the search area. No shoe, no clothing, no car key, and, most importantly, no body was found. The only positive find, the scent trail, faded into the open farmland near the county line, leaving investigators and the Swanson family with the agonizing knowledge that they were physically in the correct area, yet still utterly unable to locate him. The disappearance became complete, a true vanishing act into the farmlands of rural Minnesota. The agonizing lack of physical evidence, the absence of a body or personal belongings, has allowed various theories to flourish in the years since Brandon Swanson vanished. Each theory attempts to reconcile the 3 core facts of the case: the misdirected drive, the 47-minute walk, and the sudden exclamatory silence. The water-related accident theory, drowning exposure, remains the most heavily favored theory among law enforcement and seasoned cold case observers, primarily because of the confluence of evidence pointing directly to the Yellow Medicine River. Supporting evidence includes Brandon mentioned hearing water nearby just before the call ended. The bloodhounds, the most reliable guide in the initial search, led directly to the river's edge. Brian Swanson believed the sound was consistent with a sudden slip and fall. A sudden misstep on a slippery, muddy, or icy riverbank in the dark, without his glasses, would naturally result in a surprised expletive. The river's condition in May, being swollen, cold, and fast-moving, makes accidental drowning highly plausible. A person in a state of sudden cold water shock, especially one who may have been slightly impaired and disoriented, could easily be overcome by the current. The major counter-argument, championed by his mother, Annette Swanson, is the dog trail that allegedly continued on the far bank. If Brandon had exited the river and continued walking, he would have either died of hypothermia somewhere further away, or simply collapsed from exhaustion and injury. In a scenario where the body was in the river, the absence of discovery is attributed to the river's power, where the current could have carried the body far downstream, potentially into another body of water, or deep into a heavily vegetated or debris-laden area of the bank that was simply missed during the initial search. Submerged obstruction, where the body could be pinned underwater by fallen trees, rocks, or other submerged debris, where it remains hidden from sonar and divers. In a scenario where he died on land after escaping the river, the absence is attributed to natural concealment, where the death occurred deep within a dense slough, a thicket of trees, or in a deep drainage ditch that was overlooked in the vast search area. Environmental factors, where natural decomposition, coupled with consumption by local wildlife, coyotes, vultures, could have rendered the remains extremely difficult, if not impossible, to find after so much time. The environmental hazard theory focuses on the unforgiving nature of the farmland environment itself, particularly in the dark. Uncapped wells or cisterns are a tragic possibility. Rural Minnesota is dotted with old farmsteads, and the foundation Brandon walked past may have included an unmarked, uncapped well, cistern, or septic tank. A sudden, unexpected fall into a deep, narrow vertical shaft would elicit the immediate "oh shh" reaction and would instantly sever the phone call. leaving no sound of struggle and no possibility of escape. The deep, enclosed nature of a well would effectively conceal the body indefinitely, even against sophisticated search techniques. Marsh or slough. The area is known to have sloughs, or marshy, swampy depressions. Falling into deep, thick mud or a bog-like area can lead to a quick, silent, and permanent disappearance. The foul play theory, though lacking any physical evidence, cannot be completely ruled out by law enforcement, especially given the suddenness of the final exclamation. Potential scenarios, speculation, include a random encounter where Brandon was walking on a remote road and was found by a passing motorist, perhaps someone looking for an isolated spot to dump trash, or an opportunistic predator. The oosh could be the moment he realized he was about to be intercepted or attacked. Another speculated scenario is the farmer property owner scenario, where Brandon may have been mistaken for a trespasser or a burglar by a property owner who was protecting his land. The sudden exclamation could be his reaction to a spotlight or a confrontation with someone holding a weapon. The property owner, realizing they had injured or killed a young, lost man, may have then disposed of the body silently and effectively. This scenario is supported by the quiet, immediate end to the call, as an attacker would likely ensure the phone was immediately destroyed or removed. A third, speculated scenario is the follower, where another vehicle may have been following Brandon from one of the parties, or perhaps spotted his car in the ditch. The "oh, shh" could be the sound of a vehicle rapidly approaching from behind in the dark, leading to a quick abduction or confrontation. However, the 47 minutes of conversation suggest a significant window where he would have mentioned a vehicle pursuing him, making this a less likely scenario. The main weakness of the foul play theory is the lack of any subsequent evidence, phone activity, or ransom demand. It requires a perfect crime, a perpetrator who was in the right remote location at the exact time Brandon walked by, who carried out a swift and silent crime, and who disposed of the body so effectively that it has never surfaced. In the absence of a body, the most powerful tool for solving the case is the cell phone data, which precisely defines the search area. Given the evidence and the surrounding environment, the most parsimonious explanation remains an environmental accident, a fall into the cold river, or an unseen vertical hazard, like an old well. But until Brandon Swanson is found, the terrifying possibility that he met a violent end continues to haunt the quiet farmlands. The most enduring and positive legacy of Brandon Swanson's tragic disappearance is the change it forced in Minnesota law, a change that has provided crucial protection for countless other families facing the nightmare of a missing loved one. This legacy, known officially as the Brandon Swanson Law, was born from the bureaucratic failures and agonizing delays that plagued the initial hours of his search. The first and most damaging obstacle the Swanson family faced was the initial reluctance of law enforcement to take a missing person report immediately. Because Brandon was 19, an adult, the police, in accordance with the outdated laws of the time, felt they were not required to immediately mobilize. As noted previously, one officer told Annette Swanson that her son had a right to be missing. This prevailing cultural and legal mindset viewed missing adults through a lens of potential irresponsibility. Perhaps they ran away, perhaps they were avoiding a problem, and therefore the law enforcement obligation was minimal and the investigation could be delayed. This denial of immediate help cost the Swansons the most critical hours of the investigation. A person lost and injured, especially in a life-threatening environment like a swollen riverbank in the dark, has a very limited window for rescue. The second major hurdle was the frustrating difficulty and delay in obtaining Brandon's cell phone data. In 2008, the process of obtaining a court order for cell phone location data was slow and cumbersome. The family faced a lack of urgency and, in some cases, outright resistance from the wireless provider to release the pings that would have immediately corrected the location error. This delay meant that the initial hours-long search was conducted 25 miles away from where Brandon actually needed help. Out of this bureaucratic ordeal, the Swansons, Brian and Annette, found the resolve to advocate for change. They partnered with state legislators, notably then House Representative Marty Seifert, to push for new legislation. They also received critical support from organizations like the John Francis Foundation, which was founded by the parents of another Minnesota man, John Francis, who also went missing, and whose case highlighted similar investigative shortcomings. The collective effort led to the passing of the Brandon Swanson Law in Minnesota. The bill was signed into law by Governor Tim Pawlenty on May 7, 2009, less than a year after Brandon disappeared, and took effect on July 1, 2009. The law fundamentally changed the legal landscape for missing persons investigations in Minnesota by imposing three crucial mandatory requirements. Law enforcement agencies must take a missing persons report immediately upon notification of someone missing under dangerous circumstances, regardless of the person's age. The law explicitly took age off the table as a factor for initial police response. Authorities must immediately conduct a preliminary investigation to determine if the person is missing and whether they are endangered. The law clarifies that the agency taking the initial report must be the lead agency in the investigation, solving the potential jurisdictional confusion that arose in the Swanson case, involving 3 separate counties. Furthermore, the law mandates that if the missing person is not found within 30 days, law enforcement must immediately seek additional information, including DNA samples, dental records, X-rays, photographs, and fingerprints to aid in national database searches. The Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, BCA, was also designated as the state's missing persons clearinghouse, ensuring resources and information are shared efficiently. The Swansons' goal was to ensure that no other family would ever hear the heartbreaking words, "He has a right to be missing," when facing an emergency. Brandon's law achieved that goal, recognizing that an adult can be just as vulnerable as a child, and that the initial hours of any disappearance under suspicious or dangerous circumstances are paramount. Despite the legal victory, the personal search for Brandon continued unabated. Annette and Brian Swanson, often joined by friends, family, and volunteers, have remained tireless in their efforts. They have used media attention, from local news to national podcasts, to keep Brandon's story alive and to continuously appeal to the public for information, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant. In a heartbreaking symbol of enduring hope, the Swansons continue to leave their porch light on every night, a silent, illuminated beacon in the dark, waiting for their son to return home. The family has maintained a positive and constructive relationship with the investigators, understanding that the only path to resolution is continued effort and cooperation. The passage of time has not diminished the commitment of the Swansons, who, in transforming their private tragedy into public policy, secured a lasting protection for all Minnesotans. The legacy of Brandon Swanson is a dual one, a haunting, unsolved mystery, and a powerful legislative change that saved countless hours and likely countless lives in subsequent missing-person cases. The Brandon Swanson case is a paradigm of the modern missing without a trace mystery, defined not by what was found, but by the absence of everything. While the cell phone call provided a precise 30-mile route and a terrifying final word, it left behind a constellation of questions that continue to challenge investigators and confound the public. One of the most frustrating aspects of the initial search involved the footprints and the gravel road. Searchers did manage to locate footprints in the area, likely Brandon's, which corroborated the general path tracked by the dogs. These prints followed the road and then cut across the field, just as he described. Tragically, the crucial evidence that might have provided a clearer trail was quickly destroyed. Sometime during the first day of the search, the gravel roads in the area where the car was found and where Brandon began walking were graded. Grading is a routine farming and road maintenance procedure that involves smoothing out the gravel surface. This action irrevocably obliterated any clear, definitive footprint evidence that may have shown Brandon's exact movements, the presence of another person, or the direction he took after leaving the road. This loss compounded the tragedy of the initial police delay. Why did Brandon Swanson insist he was near Lind, 25 miles away, when he was in reality near Taunton Porter? This is the most accepted explanation. The combination of darkness, the slight disorienting effect of the alcohol, and his severe vision impairment without his glasses likely led to a fundamental misreading of the few road signs or landmarks he passed. Having started down the back roads, he may have genuinely believed a certain sequence of turns had put him on a road that led to Lind. The lack of distinguishing features in the open farmland made it impossible for him to correct this initial error. Disorientation, coupled with the stress of crashing his car, could have led to a form of tunnel vision where his brain latched onto the familiar name Lind and refused to acknowledge any contradictory information. Speculation. There is some thought that the river he was near, the Yellow Medicine River, may have been confused by Brandon with the Redwood River, which is closer to the Lind area. In his panicked, unsighted state, he may have associated the two, reinforcing his wrong belief about his position. The single most baffling element of the case remains the complete absence of Brandon Swanson's remains. Given the massive multi-year search effort, the deployment of specialized dogs, sonar, and countless volunteers, the fact that no trace of him, not a shoe, a piece of clothing, or a bone has been found, is statistically improbable in a conventional accidental death scenario. Possible explanations for the non-discovery include perfect concealment, the well cistern theory, a vertical hidden enclosure such as an old uncapped farm well or deep drainage pipe would be the most effective method of permanent concealment. The fall would be silent and instantaneous, and the verticality would protect the body from most decomposition and erosion, thus preventing its discovery. River-Lake Passage. If the river carried him away, it may have deposited his body into one of the numerous sloughs, or even flowed into a larger body of water. Though the river was thoroughly searched, a body could travel a remarkable distance and remain pinned in a location that is difficult for human searchers to access or even see. The in plain sight phenomenon. As tragic as it is, there are documented cases where remains are found years later in areas that have been searched repeatedly. The human tendency to look for a body-sized object often misses a small, decomposed, or partially submerged item. The case is a perfect storm of environmental danger, human error, and technological limitation. Brandon Swanson's final moments were witnessed by one person, his father, but the truth of his disappearance remained shrouded in the Minnesota darkness, waiting for a chance discovery to end the family's years of agonizing uncertainty. The story of Brandon Swanson is the ultimate modern cold case. A disappearance tracked by technology, witnessed by a parent, and yet utterly devoid of physical resolution. It is a cautionary tale of how a simple act of walking for help can turn into a permanent vanishing act in the vast, unforgiving emptiness of the American heartland. We know the hour, the minute, and the final word of his last known interaction. We know the precise location of his car and the 3-mile path he walked. We know he was struggling with a geographical misconception and walking without his necessary visual aid. Yet, after all the searches, the air flyovers, the sonar scans, the hundreds of miles walked, the question remains as immediate today as it was on May 14th, 2008. What happened in the split second between the utterance of "oh, shh," and the sound of silence? The available evidence points heavily toward an environmental catastrophe, a fall into the deep, cold, yellow Medicine River, or a fatal slip into an unseen pit or well in the dark farmland provides the most logical and efficient explanation for the instantaneous end of the call and the subsequent non-discovery. However, the possibility of a brief, silent encounter with a person, whether a predator, a defensive property owner, or an unknown individual, can never be fully dismissed without the presence of his remains. The absence of Brandon Swanson's body remains the final cold fact that keeps the file open and the mystery alive. For Annette and Brian Swanson, the tragedy is not just the loss of their son, but the constant daily torment of uncertainty. They live with the permanent memory of that 47-minute phone call, an intimate, shared experience that ended in an unanswerable scream and an enduring silence. Every day is a reminder of the 2-word warning, the unfulfilled promise of meeting at the car, and the knowledge that they were physically so close, yet ultimately 25 miles too far away. Their response to this tragedy, however, has been one of extraordinary resilience and compassion. They channeled their private grief into a public action, advocating tirelessly until the Brandon Swanson law was passed in Minnesota. This law, which requires law enforcement to immediately investigate missing adult cases under dangerous circumstances, stands as a testament to Brandon's memory and as a functional safety net for every family that follows. Their efforts continue to remind the public that Brandon is not just a cold case file. He is a missing son, a brother, and a friend. The porch light remains on, a symbol of their unwavering love and the hope that, one day, the Minnesota farmland will finally yield its secret. The case of Brandon Swanson remains an active and open investigation. Law enforcement, though unable to commit the same scale of resources as the initial search, continues to follow leads and re-examine the vast territory where he vanished. The resolution to this mystery will likely not come from a new technological breakthrough, but from an old-fashioned physical discovery. It will take a farmer plowing a new field, a hunter in an overlooked thicket, or the changing course of the Yellow Medicine River to expose the evidence that has been hidden for over a decade. If you are listening to this and you live in the area of Taunton, Porter, or Minneota in rural Minnesota, and you remember anything from that night in May 2008, an unusual vehicle, a light in a field, a person on the road, or any strange occurrence in the following days, please know that even the smallest, seemingly insignificant detail could be the final puzzle piece. The smallest piece of information can finally bring Brandon Swanson home. Before we conclude today's video, quick reminder to like and subscribe if you appreciate my content. If Brandon's story resonated with you, and if you believe in the power of shared knowledge to solve these enduring mysteries, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Thank you for listening, and until next time, stay safe and keep searching for the truth.